Hey guys, so today we're starting with a question. Say you wake up one morning and you realize that one of your big investments is in a Ponzi scheme. What do you do? So, your first instinct is probably we get out, which is fine, but if you stop and think for a minute, there are other potentially better things to do. Say it's a publicly traded company. Maybe then not only do you get out, but you go short to try to make money on the collapse. So that's better, but there's levels to this sort of thing. Remember, kind of by its nature, a Ponzi scheme, at least on paper, is going to be offering you very large and consistent returns for some amount of time. Jeffrey Pickauer, being one of Bernie Madoff's biggest investors, seems to have realized that he was part of a Ponzi scheme, and what he did ultimately allowed him to withdraw over $7 billion more dollars from this scheme than he had put in, while when Madoff was caught, his wealth was merely in the hundreds of millions. So not only did he keep in some money and take out others, kind of protecting his initial investment, but he leveraged the fact that he knew this was a Ponzi scheme over Madoff, because had he pulled out at any time altogether, the entirety of the fund would have collapsed. Forbes said that Pickauer's involvement in the Madoff scheme represented a, quote, vexing riddle. Ultimately, courts decided that he knew or should have known what was going on and basically clawed back everything that he had gained. So while he maybe didn't make out on this strategy that he employed, he sort of showed how the game can be played. Now, imagine it's 2006 and you realize that something is seriously wrong with the US housing market. A magnetar is a neutron star with an incredibly powerful magnetic field. It's also apparently the name of a hedge fund that I hadn't heard of until recently when it was brought up in a tweet where Mike Green, who I think is maybe the smartest guy in all of finance, described a trade that they did as the smartest trade of the Big Short, and that made everyone else involved look like an amateur. That obviously got me interested, and when I saw that there weren't any other videos on YouTube on the subject, well, that was my cue, and here we are now. To set the stage, let's think about all the players from The Big Short and what they actually did. They saw that the housing market was going to fail, and they bet against it. Then they waited. It's a strategy that made all the characters in the movie rich, but there were other people who had seen the same thing, made the bet, and lost because no one was sure of when something was going to happen. If you bet too early and you were paying out premiums, you could go bust before the market did.
Watch, it will pay. I may have been early, but I'm not wrong.
It's the same thing. It's the same thing, Mike.
Magnetar solved this problem and then some. They made sure that the bubble kept pumping for as long as they needed to, and then they structured things so that once everything blew up, all of their bets definitely would pay off. So here's what they did. It's 2005. The housing market has been on fire for a while now, but it's starting to maybe run out of momentum. Prices aren't going up quite as fast anymore. Part of the reason that it's running so hot and has been is because basically anyone who wants a loan can get a loan. There's something called ninja loans, which is not a real term, it's a slang term. It stands for no income, no job, no assets, even though that's one too many letters to actually spell ninja. The reason that banks don't really care about making these terrible loans is they're not keeping any of it on their books anyways. They're grouping together all these mortgages that they're issuing and then selling them off to other people. So they're essentially getting the cash up front without holding any of the risk. Businesses and investment firms are willing to take on these mortgages because they're paying out a better rate than bonds are, and they're seen as still being virtually no risk. Needless to say, this didn't turn out to be a correct view on how things worked. So what's important about these packages that all the mortgage were bundled into, called CDOs basically is that they're sold in tranches. This is sort of what the Jenga scene is about in The Big Short. So there's the top of the funnel. These were mortgages that were pretty legitimately good, high credit score people in houses that aren't crazily valued or likely to maintain their value. So those are pretty safe, although some of those ended up failing anyways. And then as you go down and lower, you get to things that are risky even by what people perceive to be the risk levels of the day that were paying higher and higher percentages. So in 2005, early 2006, there were fewer and fewer people around who were willing to take on this very bottom tranche of the CDO. And without being able to sell the bottom tranche, you couldn't sell the whole thing. So CDOs could have been coming to an end, but here comes Magnetar. They start taking on all the bottom end tranches of all these CDOs. They're basically saving the industry. JP Morgan estimates that at the time between a third or up to as much as a half of all the CDOs that were getting made had Magnetar involved. So when you're the only player like this, you have some amount of power, right? Because the deal's not going to get done if it's not for you. So they say, hey, you know, all that garbage tranche that you're selling us, we're only going to take it if you meet our one demand. So the banks are like, sure, what do you need? They say, we want even worse garbage stuffed into as much places in this CDO as you can put it. And the banks are like, okay, I guess, because ostensibly the reason why Magnetar is making all these bets is because the worse end of this is paying you a higher interest rate. So these banks probably think that this fund somehow sees the US housing market holding up, even though it looked like it was at least flattening out or going into decline. So maybe they were betting that things would work out. So they stuff all these CDOs with, garbage, bad mortgages. They're probably going to fail. What else do? CDO 1, they get it to include part of CDO 2 and vice versa. So they're chaining these two things that should have been separate together. Essentially, what they're doing is they're lining up dominoes, right? They're saying, if this one goes bad, it's likely that this other one will go bad too, because not only are they both involved in the US housing market, they're literally involved with each other. Obviously, if this was the whole trade, this is not a recipe for success. No one really knew at this point what Magnetar was up to. There was even an article in, I believe, Business Week that listed in 2007 companies most likely to be shredded, as they called it, and Magnetar was towards the top of the list for making all these risky bets. But what do? Then they go and make their bet against the housing market, and they do it by betting against CDOs, and not just CDOs in general, but a lot of the CDOs they bet against are the ones that they built themselves. So at this point, it seems like, well, your question may be, they're on both sides of the market. So where is the real profit here? Think of it like this. Someone is building their house. They're running out of money and they tell you, hey, can you loan me something to build the kitchen? And you go, sure. You build them the kitchen and then you turn on all the gas on all the burners and you walk out, go to the bank and take out insurance against the whole house. When the whole thing blows up, literally in this case, you're going to lose out on the small loan you gave them for the kitchen, but your payout is going to be the whole value of the house. That's what's going on here. There would be 50, 100 million to buy the bottom tranche of the thing, but the insurance payout would be multiples of the amount that they had to put in. And they had more or less guaranteed they were going to get this payout. Now, there's another feature of this which just added to the genius of the plan. So not only did they prop up the market long enough to make their bets, not only did they set up this domino structure so that everything that they were getting involved in was going to pay off, which we know it worked because there was analysis done at the end of 2008 that showed 96% of the CDOs that Magnetar had been involved with ended up failing by that point, whereas only of comparable CDOs, about 68% had failed. So the third piece of this plan that was genius, we kind of already described it, but when I first read through it, I didn't pick it up until it was pointed out to me. But the thing that killed a lot of the guys in The Big Short, as we talked about, was the timing. You're paying monthly on this insurance you took out basically while you're waiting for it to fail. Well, Magnetar is also paying on this insurance it took out waiting for things to fail, except as long as the market hasn't failed, those ridiculous risky tranches of CDOs that they own are paying the super risky interest rates that they were promised. So they're just taking this interest money and paying the insurance fees while they wait. So they could have waited for years, probably, maybe indefinitely, until the thing failed. That's where the genius was here. They could wait as long as they needed to, and they knew when it failed, everything they had would be part of the failure. In 2008, as we all know, things did ultimately fall apart. Magnetar made billions. Its founder made almost 300 million personally. Normally, when the public or the media goes after short sellers, they at least have the defense that they helped suppress any sort of bubble that might have been brewing in the economy. But here, this was not the case. Magnetar went in there and just fanned the flames. But why am I talking about Magnetar anyways in 2023? How did these guys end up on my timeline? Well, maybe you've heard of a company called NVIDIA. NVIDIA's been blowing out earnings, right, on the back of their chips being used for AI. And how have they been blowing out earnings? Well, there's been huge orders coming in from, places like Google or Microsoft or Tesla. There's also been a really big order come in from some company called CoreWeave. Some people looked into this and they thought it was pretty interesting. CoreWeave is this little known startup, but they have access to NVIDIA chips. And they've been buying these chips thanks to loans given to them by Magnetar. If you think AI is in a bubble, and you think NVIDIA is kind of leading the charge in this bubble, and now it looks like NVIDIA earnings might be getting propped up by CoreWeave via Magnetar, it's probably nothing. Thanks for watching, guys.